It was mid-January, and I went over to my best friend Caitlin's house. It was just supposed to be a regular Friday night. Her parents and brother had gone to her aunt's place like they always did, leaving us alone in the house. Caitlin had stayed back this time, and we thought we'd have a fun night to ourselves. Just two friends hanging out, eating snacks, watching movies, making TikToks. Everything felt completely normal, but then, just as we were starting to unwind, we heard a noise. At first it was faint, almost like it could have been the wind, but then it grew louder. It wasn't just any noise, it was this scraping sound, like nails scratching against the wall. It reminded me of someone dragging their nails down a chalkboard, making my skin crawl. Sometimes it would be quiet, almost unnoticeable, and then suddenly it would get louder, so loud it actually hurt our ears. We were both shaken. We paused the movie, and without saying anything, we locked Caitlin's bedroom door. We sat there in silence, our backs pressed against her bed, and we tried to stay calm. Caitlin texted her mom, hoping for reassurance or at least an explanation. But before we could even process what was happening, her phone buzzed with a reply. The message was short but chilling. "Make sure your door is locked. Keep your phones with you." Her mom had checked the security cameras and saw something. She said there was a man dressed in a black trench coat and rain boots who had come in through the back window. She had already called the police and promised to be home soon, but until then, we were on our own. We sat there paralyzed with fear. We heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps in the kitchen, heavy and slow, echoing through the silence of the house. Each step brought him closer and closer, until they finally stopped right outside Caitlin's door. We looked at each other, our faces pale. Then the doorknob rattled. It was a slow, steady rattle at first, like he was testing it, seeing if it would open. But then it grew more aggressive, each twist and tug more desperate than the last. The door shook under the force, and we could only sit there, feeling completely helpless. The rattling finally stopped, but we heard his footsteps again, pacing down the hall, heading away from the door. Caitlin got an idea. She crawled over to stuff a blanket along the crack at the bottom of the door, hoping to hide any light or movement that might give us away. As she did, we saw the shadow of his feet under the door, pausing for a moment as if he was listening for any sign of us. And then he came back. The doorknob rattled again, but this time it sounded different, like he was using something to try and pry it open. Caitlin held onto the lock with all her strength, and I got up to help her. We pressed our weight against the door, our hands sweaty and trembling, as he continued to pound and shake the door, the sound growing louder and louder. Suddenly everything stopped. The silence was almost worse than the banging. And then we heard it. A faint siren in the distance, steadily growing closer. But what chilled me to the bone was the sound that followed. We heard him laugh. It wasn't loud, but it was this strange, hollow laugh that lingered in the air. We listened as he moved away from the door, heard his footsteps retreating, and finally, the back window closing. A few minutes later, Caitlin's parents rushed home. The police arrived, but by then he was long gone. They searched the house, but there was no trace of him, no fingerprints, nothing to say he'd ever been there. After that night, Caitlin's family took no chances. They got a guard dog, installed even more security, and made sure everything was locked tight whenever they left. But for Caitlin and me, the memory of that night lingered, a shadow that followed us. We never forgot the sound of his laugh or the way he'd stood just outside her door, close enough to reach us. And every now and then I find myself wondering if he ever came back. I'm 16, just an average girl who loves to draw. My art was a kind of escape, a way to share a piece of myself with strangers online. Instagram was my go-to. I'd post my drawings there, never really expecting much. But one Thursday evening, Something happened that would change everything. I got a notification, a message request from someone I didn't know. Usually I'd ignore strangers online, too many risks out there. But that night, I don't know. Maybe I was feeling a little lonely. So without thinking twice, I accepted. The message was simple. "Hey, I love your artwork." Followed by 5 heart emojis. It felt innocent enough. I replied with a quick thank you and was about to put my phone down when 2 more messages came through almost immediately. The first one said, "This is me, by the way." And then, a photo. Curious, I clicked. What I saw was strange. It was a picture of a woman. She looked to be in her mid-30s, heavy-set, lying on her bed, staring right into the camera with a weird smirk. At first she looked harmless, but something about her face felt wrong. I couldn't shake it, that gut feeling that told me this was a mistake, but I brushed it off. Maybe she was just a fan. I went on with my night, watching a movie to distract myself. My mom was out, picking up my nephew, so I was home alone. I figured I'd just relax. But then, another notification lit up my screen. It was her again. This time I hesitated before opening it, and when I did, I regretted it immediately. The photo was disgusting, completely inappropriate. And to make it worse, she'd added a message, "Like what you see?" followed by a winking, tongue-out emoji. I felt sick. Angry and disgusted, I blocked her instantly and reported the account. That was it. I just wanted to forget about it. But as much as I tried, that image was burned into my mind. I couldn't shake it. A few minutes later, just when I thought I'd finally put it behind me, another notification appeared. My heart skipped a beat. It was a new message request from a brand new account. My stomach twisted as I opened it, and I couldn't believe my eyes. Her message screamed, "Why did you block me?" All in caps with angry emojis. My hand started to tremble, but I forced myself to ignore it, hoping she'd just leave me alone. I tried to focus on my movie, pretending everything was fine. But minutes later, another message request came through. This time, I felt a wave of terror wash over me. The message was different. This one wasn't just words. It was a photo. My heart pounded as I opened it. The picture was of my backyard, and in the distance, through the window, you could see me, sitting there, in my living room. Underneath the photo were 3 chilling words. "I can see you." I couldn't breathe. Slowly, I looked up from my phone and turned toward the sliding glass door. And there she was. She was standing there, half hidden in the shadows, staring at me. Only the moonlight lit her face, but I could make out that same twisted smirk. My blood ran cold as I realized what she was holding in her hand. A kitchen knife. I didn't waste a second. I bolted up the stairs, every step echoing in the silent house. I darted into my room, slammed the door, and hid in the closet. My hands shook as I dialed 911, my voice barely a whisper as I gave them my address. I could hardly think straight. How had she found me? How long had she been watching me? The questions raced through my mind, my panic rising. Then I heard it. And then, through the silence, I heard the distant wail of sirens. They were coming. Her footsteps stopped, and for a moment, everything was still. Then came the hurried sound of her footsteps retreating, rushing down the stairs. I heard the front door creak open, followed by a struggle as the cops yelled commands. Then, the unmistakable crackling of a taser. I stayed frozen in that closet, my heart still pounding, until I was sure it was over. When I finally dared to leave my hiding place, the police were outside, loading her into the back of a car. I watched from the window, barely able to believe what had just happened. A week later, my mom and I got a call from the police. They told us she'd been doing this for years, stalking and harassing young girls just like me. She'd even been in and out of treatment facilities for mental issues, but nothing had stopped her, and she'd been watching me for weeks, maybe even months, waiting for the right moment. I shivered, thinking about all those times I'd posted pictures, unaware that someone out there was watching every move. Since that night, I've kept my profile locked, my doors bolted, my life guarded, and sometimes, when I look out the window, I wonder if she's still out there, watching, waiting for another chance. And I pray that I never see her face again. This happened over a decade ago, back when I was still in high school. My parents were away at a wedding that required an overnight stay, and my brother was working the night shift. That left me alone in our old house. It was in a neighborhood on the East Coast, a blue-collar place that had seen better days. I was looking forward to some rare alone time. As an introverted teenager, I loved my nights to myself, playing some PlayStation, ordering takeout, maybe a pizza or Chinese, and watching Dragon Ball Z until I'd doze off on the couch. My old beagle, Cecil, was always right there with me, quiet as a mouse. He was an old soul, that dog, who barely ever barked or made a sound. Instead, he'd just curl up by my side and lay his head in my lap. That night, things started out just as I'd planned. I'd finished my last slice of pizza and was beginning to drift off when a sudden, loud bang echoed from the back alley. I brushed it off as typical city noise, but Cecil's head snapped up and his fur bristled. That wasn't like him. I tried to calm him, but then, not even 2 minutes later, there was another bang, louder this time. Before I knew it, Cecil did something I'd never seen before. He leapt off the couch, darting to the basement door with a ferocity that seemed to take years off his age. He barked and growled like some kind of guard dog, which was so unlike him that it sent a chill down my spine. His intensity made me realize this wasn't just random noise. Someone was down there. Someone was trying to get into my house. I felt my stomach drop as I realized they were at the old basement door. It was a rusty thing, almost impossible to open even with a key. But it led to the back alley, a secluded spot where someone could break in without being seen. The banging continued, persistent and unrelenting. Whoever was out there wasn't going away. They were determined. I knew what that meant. If someone's trying that hard to get in, I rushed upstairs, heart pounding, and grabbed the wooden baseball bat I kept under my bed. As I crept back down, my mind was racing, torn between fear and this twisted sense of bravery. I wasn't about to let anyone mess with my home. As I reached the basement, Cecil blew past me like he was a dog half his age, charging toward the door. The banging stopped abruptly, and then I heard it. A man's voice just outside muttering, "Oh crap." Then silence. The intruder had heard us coming. There was no movement, no footsteps, just a chilling, dead quiet. I stayed up the rest of the night, gripping that bat, my mind racing with what-ifs. My brother came home in the morning, and I told him everything. Together we went to check the basement door. When we gave it a tug, the entire thing fell off its hinges. One more shove and that man would have been inside. I don't know what would have happened if Cecil hadn't reacted the way he did. I'm convinced he sensed the urgency that night, knew something terrible was about to happen. A few years later, Cecil's age caught up with him, and we had to let him go. Before they gave him the injection, I had a few moments alone with him. I whispered a final thank you for his friendship and for what he did that night. I was a grown man by then, with a family of my own, a life that might not have happened if it weren't for that lazy old dog who somehow knew, that one night, exactly what I needed him to do. I'm 17, about to start my senior year of high school, and up until last week, the scariest part of my job was cleaning kennels. I work at a vet clinic, helping out with all things pet-related, and sometimes people even ask me to watch their animals. It's how I found myself staying at one of my teachers' houses while they were away. They had just moved in, so the place was mostly empty and stacked with unpacked boxes. But nothing could have prepared me for what was waiting inside. It was Monday morning when I first stepped into their house. armed with my overnight bag and a quiet excitement. I spent the day hanging out with their two dogs, Milo and Chili, a young, curious pup and an older, calm companion. I was getting used to the house, the way the light fell through the windows, the quiet hum of a place still settling. When my mom called me home for dinner, I left the house just as the sun began to dip, making sure to turn off all the lights before I went. A few hours later, as I stepped back into the house, an uneasy feeling crept over me. The hallway and downstairs bathroom lights were both on. I could have sworn I turned everything off. Had someone stopped by? Only a few family friends had the key hidden under the back doormat. Ignoring the feeling prickling at the back of my mind, I brushed it off and focused on getting ready for bed. I decided to sleep in the living room. It was the coolest room, and with Milo and Chili nearby, I figured I'd feel safe. The house was eerily quiet, and as darkness thickened, I shut all the doors connecting the living room to the rest of the house. The dogs settled in, and soon I drifted into an uneasy sleep. But not for long. A few hours later, I jolted awake to low growls, deep and menacing. Milo and Chili were both staring at the door, their fur bristling, growling in a way I'd never heard before. These dogs were usually gentle, sweet, never aggressive. My heart started to race, but I told myself they were just uneasy in a new house, and eventually managed to fall back asleep. The next night was peaceful. The dogs and I slept soundly, and I thought maybe the first night had just been nerves. Then came Wednesday. I returned to the house a bit after 8, exhausted from work, but something was off the moment I opened the door. Both dogs greeted me at the entrance, tails wagging. It didn't make sense. They were supposed to be locked in the sunroom. The door to the sunroom was wide open, and the ceiling fans that I'd left on were now eerily still. That familiar chill crept over me, and all I wanted to do was leave. But I'd promised my teacher I'd stay there with the dogs to keep the place safe. Swallowing my unease, I went around, checking and locking all the doors, telling myself it was just my imagination. As I settled back onto the couch, Milo kept pacing, his gaze fixed up the stairs. Every so often he would stop, tense, his eyes locked on the upper floor. Then he started growling again, deep, threatening, his teeth bared at the empty staircase. I tried calling him over, hoping to calm him down, but he stayed rooted to the spot, staring, waiting. Finally, he came to sit by me, but he kept glancing over his shoulder, his eyes following something. I tried to ignore the growing dread in my chest, turning off the lamp next to me and lying down. My gaze wandered, and through the dim light I could see into the sunroom, which had no curtains, only big windows letting in a faint glow from the street. Just as I was about to drift off, the faint glow vanished. The room went pitch dark. I blinked, trying to make sense of it. Both dogs bolted to attention, Milo rushing to the base of the stairs, barking ferociously, while Chili stayed close to the door, his growl low and menacing. My heart pounded as I strained my eyes, trying to see if there was movement in the darkness of the sunroom. Nothing. The fear was overwhelming. I wanted to call the police, but felt silly. There was no one there, or at least I hoped there wasn't. Instead, I called my grandpa, barely able to keep my voice steady. I crept to the back door, grabbing the house key off the counter as I bolted out, but something stopped me in my tracks. The gate to the sidewalk was wide open. I didn't wait to figure out why. I ran. As I rushed through the night, my shortcut took me past the junior high school. In the moonlight, the building loomed dark and foreboding. But as I passed, something caught my eye. One of the side doors was open, yawning into a hallway of thick, impenetrable blackness. It was as if the dark was spilling out, reaching toward me. I sprinted, too terrified to look back, until finally I reached my house, slamming the door behind me, my heart racing. The next morning, I returned to my teacher's house, this time with my grandpa by my side. I couldn't shake the fear gnawing at my mind. As we entered, my eyes fell on the sunroom door, standing wide open, just like last night. And as we climbed the stairs, we found the closet door at the top open too, as if someone had been there, waiting, hidden in the shadows. My grandpa checked the whole house top to bottom. No one was there. It was empty. But that emptiness felt wrong, haunted, as if someone or something had left a part of themselves behind. To this day, I can't explain what happened in that house. I just know that the quiet, the darkness, the stillness, it wasn't right. It was like the house had been watching me, waiting for me. And sometimes, in the dead of night, I still hear those low, angry growls echoing in my mind, and I pray for the sake of whoever stays there next, that the house is finally empty.